So our topic for today is what do we like about writing? Do either of you want to get started or?
I'll go ahead and start it.
Okay.
Um, what I like about writing, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine on Twitter the other day. It was actually, what did you want to be when you were a kid? And I said I wanted to be a film director, which is true. As a kid, that was always what I wanted to do. But it turns out if you want to direct movies, you have to like talk to people and go places. And as an introvert, that just doesn't work for me. So at some point, I realized, well, I can just tell this story I want to tell. I can just write it down, and it's practically like a movie. I can see the movie in my head. So why not just write it all down? And it's like a cheaper way of telling the stories I want to tell, and I can just do it alone. So that's what I love about it, is the opportunity to just share these stories that I have in my mind.
Yeah, it's making mind movies. Yeah, and you're right. That's I think that's how a lot of us come to this. I mean, it's something we can try and do that isn't like, you don't have to be beautiful, and you don't have to be athletic, and you don't have to be able to act or sing or dance or anything. All you have to do is, imagine things and try and get the imaginings into words. And, that's something that just about anybody can do as long as you have a functioning brain. It doesn't matter about all the other stuff.
Yeah. When I thought about this topic, the way I thought about it is that what I like about writing is the challenge. And I've spent most of my adult life constantly searching for something new to challenge me. And writing is something that there's no end to what the challenges are. If I wrote in a particular genre, well, I got bored with that. I can try a different genre or a different way of telling a story. And that's what I like about writing, is the challenge of trying to see if I can do it. Can I come up with an idea and I think, okay, can I make a story out of this? And that's the part of writing that keeps motivating me, is trying to see if I can rise to the challenge.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how I started, I guess, is just to see, like, the idea of actually writing a novel, just to see, let's just do it. Because again, it was something that you could do without buying a lot of equipment or, doing a lot of
Right.
prep. You just sit down and write. And I wrote with a pen, on paper. So it was just really about as simple as it could get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's true. And like, being a film director to really do it requires, like you said, networking and knowing people and connecting and equipment. You can't just go into your room and pull out a pad of paper or a laptop and start, make a film. You have to have things to do that. And writing
and you have to sell it. I think for the movie, you have to actually sell the idea big time to somebody first before you can do anything. Whereas with the writing, at least, and when I started, I thought, I'll write this. I want to publish it. And so there you write something, and then you try to sell it either to a publisher who will put it out as a published work for you, or you publish it yourself and try and sell to readers. And that's kind of where that's where it falls down for some of us. But I mean, even without a lot of sales, I think I still feel it's a thing worth doing.
That's one thing I like about it too, particularly about indie publishing, is that if you have a story to sell to somebody, if you have to convince a publisher to publish it, you have to first convince them that this is going to sell enough copies to make it worth your while. Because I've heard stories of people who are like, the publisher is like, yeah, I think this is a pretty good story, but I don't think it's marketable. So, sorry, you're out of luck. But when you go the indie route, it doesn't matter. If 10 or 20 people love that story, then it's worthwhile to my mind.
It's the curse of writing literary fiction. I think the response from most agents and publishers is, I loved it, but I don't know how to sell it. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep coming back to that every single time we talk.
Yeah. Exactly. And actually, I was, when I thought the topic was going to be just indie authors and specific ones and all that. I was going to try and broaden things to just the whole phenomenon of indie publishing. And I think it's not sort of the poor cousin of real publishing. I think it's a whole different thing in itself that sort of runs parallel to traditional publishing, where it's a business and sales is paramount and all that. I think by not having to worry so much about sales, we collectively, and it's a big collective too with all kinds of stuff in it, are producing things that wouldn't ever have been created in the traditional publishing business world.
Yeah.
So there is that, although who knows who will ever read them. I mean, I think we all think about, 200 years from now, things will be different, and somebody will unearth our books on some sort of electronic thing, or maybe the printed books themselves, and we'll be like famous.
They'll just have a chip. They'll just have a chip in their head, and all the books will be in that chip.
Yeah, that could be. Well, it depends, unless, of course, the apocalypse comes and everyone's sitting around campfires reading old paper books.
Okay, if you had to pick one of your books to be an old paperback that people 200 years from now are reading around a campfire, what would it be?
Well, my 4 books are a series, so I think I just have to say the first series. Yeah, The Friendship of Mortals, because that's kind of, and that one was so easy to write. Like, it was magic, so it's sort of special still, even though it was the very first thing I read or wrote, and probably some of the things I've written since are actually technically better, but that would be the one I'd pick.
Yeah. What about you, Berthold?
I'd pick The Directorate. In large part, the cover of that is meant to look like an old paperback book from like the pulp era of science fiction. I would love to see that. That's actually the perfect context I imagine someone reading it in, is they found this old book, they don't really know what it is, and they just pick it up and are flipping through it and saying, well, this is interesting.
Well, and when they get to the space element, all bets are off there.
Yes. I'll have to read that again, actually. Yeah.
I think right now mine would probably be The Irreparable Past, which leads into, as we were talking, I was thinking about the other thing. It's not necessarily what a thing that I like about writing, but it's why I write. And I wrote a blog post about this last week or so. That there was this period of time, maybe about 10 years ago, when I read 3 books in a row that made me cry. And whenever anybody asks me for book recommendations, I ponder whether I should tell them about these books, because each of them kind of has a little bit of a gimmick. And a lot of people are turned off by gimmicks when they read fiction. But I recommended these books to a guy that I knew in Oregon. He read them and texted me his thoughts as he was reading them. And it made me realize that that's why I write. I want to make people feel the way I felt when I read those books. Not that I want them to be miserable and depressed, because in a lot of sense, the reasons why I cried while reading those books, they were sad tears, but they were also happy tears. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah.
It's just that's if I can make somebody feel the way I felt reading those books, that's why I write. That's what I like. Which I have to say, it's not my objective to like come up with big, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to force that. Because when writers try to force that kind of thing, it becomes obvious. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, great. Okay, here's the tearjerker. And I don't try to do that. I try to do something that's very real. I'm succeeding at that, but that's the other thing I was thinking about in terms of this topic is if I can make people feel like that, that's what I want
to do. Yeah, and you're right. You can't do it by, like, you want that to happen, but you can't there's no formula for it. So you just have to do the best you can with your plot and your characters and hope that that's the effect.
Yes.
To move someone emotionally there.
Yeah.
You you mentioned, Mark, the idea of it's a challenge writing, and that was not like why I initially got into it. But you're right. That's actually, I realize that's something I enjoy. Is like, after writing my first few books and getting feedback on that, it becomes like an interesting process of, okay, can I write something that will generate a more positive response? Can I improve on what I've done? Can I come up with something people like better? And each time, it's a fun process figuring out how to do that. Pretty much
Yeah.
everything I've written, I think after my like initial two books is sort of premised on I got some sort of feedback from somebody and was like, oh, that's interesting. How could I address that in a new book? And that's really fun.
Yeah. There's a couple of different ways that I describe this, and like I said earlier, one of the things is I'm constantly looking for something new, new recipes to make, new things to bake. At one point, right around when I started writing, I also started trying to teach myself how to play classical guitar, and I spent a couple of years at that. Now I'm painting, doing other things. So I constantly, like I said, I'm looking for something new. The other thing is, I'm an attorney, and I always tell this story. Um, my second job as an attorney, my first job with the state of California. At one point, I was given a question about H-1B visas. That we had an employee at one of our facilities who was on an H-1B visa, and there was some problem with the visa, and I was asked to look into it. And my initial response was, "Are you kidding me? I don't know anything about visas or immigration. Why would you ask me?" And then I went and sat at my desk, and it became like a jigsaw puzzle that I had to figure out not just how the pieces fit together. I actually had to find the pieces and then put them together. And that's what I liked in my job, in my career, about new things. You have to put the puzzle together. And that's the same way I kind of feel about writing is, again, you mentioned you get feedback and then you think maybe that's another idea for a story. Wherever the ideas come from, the idea becomes the image for the jigsaw puzzle. And then you have to figure, like I said, you don't even get the pieces. You have to find the pieces and then put them together. And that's I like that, having those kinds of challenges. So.
And you're not just working by rules either. It's not like paint the number. Actually, if someone doesn't think about things much, might think, well, when you work with, as a lawyer, you've got the law and that's your rules, right? But it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. Yeah. And what I worked at as a profession was library cataloging. And there has always been a rule book for that. Now, I think over the century and a half that was done very systematically, there were a number of different rules. Every now and then they get rewritten. And in fact, I started out with one set of rules when I started working, and as I left the profession, there was another set. And but it's a huge, complicated, big book or, mass of rules, and you have to interpret some of them, and they're not really cut and dry and all that. So figuring out how to use these rules to make something work. And writing is much the same, although I'd say there the rules are even loosey-goosey, except for the really fundamental, English grammar rules about how to construct sentences and put words together so that they're actually comprehensible by somebody. But beyond that, it's kind of you make it up yourself as you go along.
Well, even those grammar rules, I tend to kind of fiddle with those as well. Incomplete sentences and run-on sentences. Sometimes it's there's a rhythm sometimes that I'm looking for, and writing every single sentence grammatically sometimes doesn't work for that objective.
Well, especially not for fiction and dialogue. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to mention your last post about speech tags is a perfect example of a part of the challenge. Okay, now you're writing a story and there's this, time for some dialogue. how do you get into the dialogue? How do you describe the dialogue? How do you, you know, how do you identify who's talking? I mean, it's all part of the the process of putting the puzzle together.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and you know, like I said, with your post, if all the speech tags are said and asked, that's pretty boring dialogue.
Yeah, and people did come up with the thing where you don't actually apply a tag. You just say somebody did something, and right after that they say something, so you know
Right,
that's who's
right.
speaking. And so I think using that, you have all these techniques, and I think it's a mistake when some people, who write blogs say this is the way it has to be, or you
Right,
never
right.
do this. I think it's good to put out things like, here's something that worked for me. And then people can read that, and they don't feel like they have to do it that way. But it's one more thing that maybe they hadn't thought of. And then everybody goes off and does their piece of writing, and they combine and mix and match, and they come up with something that seems good to them, and maybe it will be to others. So
Yeah,
that's the way I see it, rather than having the rules. Because I think when someone's just starting out writing, they might think of it as, a big thing. Oh, there's all these writers out there. There's the wrong way and the right way, and you get bombarded with advice. And I think if you try to keep all that stuff in your mind while you're trying to construct your story, you're going to go nuts.
right,
Come up
right,
with a mess, probably, or
right.
just quit.
You're not on Twitter, are you?
No, not yet. Someone has
Don't, because
persuaded.
you'll see so much of this stuff on Twitter. It's just will drive you absolutely crazy.
But it's only like it's short, though. Although I guess people link to things, don't they?
Yeah, no, but it's just there's a very very healthy writing community
Mm-hmm.
on Twitter, and so much of it is, what's your favorite rule of writing, or what's the best writing advice you've ever received, or the worst writing advice you ever received. And a lot of times they degenerate into, you can't do this or you have to do that, and it's, stop. I've always, so let's say, let's change this a little bit. What wouldn't I like about writing is if
Huh?
there were rules that I had to follow and I couldn't write without following those rules. That would
No, it's
become,
not that
that would
bad.
be, I'm sorry?
For me, the thing I don't like is the fact that I don't have to do it, and
Yeah,
the only thing that's going to make me write is me. I
right.
mean, I think it's different. That's where traditional publishing, maybe, if you have a contract with a publisher where you have to deliver another 2 books by some
Yeah,
particular date,
yeah,
that's going to be a motivator. But when you don't have, and you don't have like an adoring fan base who keeps sending you tweets saying, write some more, I really want to see, I don't have that either. So the only motivator is me, and
yeah,
just thinking, I really have to write this next book, or I have to write 3 more books before I shuffle off
yeah,
to wherever. So that's hard, because
yeah,
that first book, like I say, wrote itself, but I found my subsequent ones haven't. So it has to be me saying to me, I have to, okay, now we're going to sit down and write the next page. And that's what I've been doing since mid-December. Is, I said, I'll commit to 1 page a day, which takes about an hour. And I'm still doing the handwritten thing for the first draft. So I'm on page 58 now.
well, at
And I
least
figure at
you're
about
doing it.
400 words a page, that's upward of 30,000. So we're
Yeah,
getting somewhere. Mind you,
yeah.
every now and then I write a little note on the manuscript. This is crap. But I'm thinking I'll worry about that when it's the second draft.
See, that's what my brain says to me, and that's what stops me from writing. So
Well,
maybe
when you
that's the
can
way.
go back and read it, then it's a lot easier. Because
Yeah.
I've not gone back to read anything I've written on this manuscript. It's
Okay.
just, I pile it up and it sits there, and then at the end of June I'll be done, and then I'll go back and see if I can decipher it.
That's a good
That's
approach, and
yeah.
yeah, I'd say that's actually one thing I do not enjoy about writing is exactly that feeling of this thing I've just written is terrible. It's like, very often I write something, I'm like, oh, that's awful. And I know it means a lot of revision ahead of me. So you're probably right. The thing to do is just to plow ahead and worry about it
Mm-hmm.
later.
Yeah. I've heard it's best to write the first draft really fast, But, and if I ever get off on a streak with this thing, I certainly won't say, "Oh, I've done my page. I'm just going to stop now." And if I have the urge to keep going, I'll keep going. But the minimum amount is the page that I'm going to show up for every day. So that's it. But yeah, I figure by the end of June I'll be done if I keep up at this rate.
That's a good way to do it, especially if you can shut the critique part of your brain down while you're writing your pages.
Yeah, so far it's worked.
Okay, I'm gonna give that a try. Page a day.
You can do it.
We'll see what happens.
And I do have a sort of outline. I mean, not a real outline, but I kind of know where I'm going, and I have, not deep. I think that page a day thing would work really well for someone who plots, because you'd have your detailed plot and line, your outline, and all you'd have to do is write this next little bit. Now, mine's kind of loosey goosey, but I find that it sort of arrives when I'm there. If you know what I have, take the pen and I start writing and I keep going. Like, I'm not sitting there chewing the pen for 15 minutes. I actually keep going. But that's where the crap part comes from, is because sometimes, I'm describing somebody doing something and it's something pretty trivial, and that's when I think, oh man. But see, the plan is to end up with about 100,000 words and then blow away about 10 or 15,000 of them. And I'm hoping that the 10 or 15,000 will be the parts where I'm thinking right now, this doesn't look too good.
So you said you take about an hour to write a page.
Yeah.
When you're, how do you decide you're done? You just got to the last line of the piece of paper and you put your pen down?
What I try to do is I try to do a little bit of the next page. That way, like, if today's, I'm a quarter into the next one already. So that's, again, it's psychologically helpful, because I'll say, see, all you have to do is this less than a page. And actually, I don't think it even takes an hour. I think it's more like half an hour, maybe 3/4 of. So it really isn't a huge time commitment. And I'm not sure if the results will be stellar, but at least I'm cranking something out. Whereas otherwise, if I sort of felt I absolutely have to sit down and do 3 hours a day, that would be just too much, and I'd probably get fed up with it and quit. At least this way we have some kind of forward movement, even if it's like an inch a day kind of thing.
Okay. Because I started writing the next chapter in the story that Berthold wants me to finish. Putting all the responsibility on him. The jump, and chapter 8, and I started writing it, and I wrote, I don't know, a page and a half, and I just, your comment about making a note on the side, this is horrible. That's exactly how I felt about it, and I've just decided, okay, I need to start the chapter all over again, because it's not anything that really is worth the words that put it together. So
yeah, I've had a few spots where I'll draw a line. I think it's so much easier when you're writing by hand. You'll draw a line and you'll say, in the previous scene, get rid of X, Y, and Z, and then you just kind of start with the next bit where X, Y, and Z, or just X, some sort of thing. Like I had a sort of section where I was going to have 3 people go on a road trip, and we were going to get to somewhere and have meet other people and talk about things and stuff. And I realized that having 3 people was just going to be a real pain, because one of them, didn't really have anything to do, and I'd have to think about what to do with this person while they were in the new place. And I thought, no. So even though I'd already written a little bit where the guy's there and he's grumpy and he's doing this and that, I just decided, nope, he's out. So I wrote a note, get rid of X, and then moved on without him. It's like I kicked him out of the car and go home. So
gonna have to hitchhike home.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, when we're done, I'm gonna go write a page.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it would work for people who plot things out. Do you plot? Have you plotted the story
out? No, I
out?
don't plot in detail. I plot vaguely, and I sort of, maybe sometimes I sit down and I write a little note at the bottom of the page. Next scene, 1, 2, 3. These three things should happen. And then I work on that. But I don't have sort of a master plan with, character bios and storyboarding and all that. And I kind of know where we're going. Like we're going to go back to Egypt eventually and stuff like that. So yeah, but the details are they're still fairly fuzzy. And then there's the little notebook, with the notes in it. For if I have an idea, I write it down right away. The trouble with the notebook, with the ideas, is that you have to actually go back and read the notes. I mean, that sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but if you deposit an idea in the notebook and then you forget it's there, then you might as well not have written it down. So every now and then I go through all the notes. Oh yeah, that. And if its time has come, then I'll incorporate it into whatever is happening. So
I have another question for both. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Mark. You go ahead.
Well, I have another question for both of you. When you're writing, you think about the reader?
Oh yeah.
Is there some mythical, imaginary reader out there that you're thinking about while you're writing?
Yeah, and I think they probably are pretty imaginary. Actually, I think the reader might be a version of me, which doesn't really help much. So yeah, I do sort of. This would come more in the subsequent drafts, I think, where I'm really trying to refine it and get rid of the superfluous stuff in that. And that's where I'd be thinking about, okay, if I were reading this, what I think and the word choices and is the scene powerful enough and stuff like that. But yeah, I do think about them. And actually it's when you read reviews of your stuff by people, you can sort of tell the ones that really weren't into it. I mean, even if their review isn't negative, they kind of being in this Goodreads reading rounds group, the way that works is you end up with 4 books you have to read and review from the 10 people in the group. And they have to, 4 of the other people in the group have to read and review your book. So you get people reading your book who probably wouldn't have if it weren't for that. And I can sort of tell which ones thought it was okay, but they weren't really the right readers for that book. Mm-hmm. You can kind of tell by how they review it. And I think, oh, you really didn't get it. But, it's just one of those things. It is kind of artificial, but at least you get a few reviews that aren't rigged. It isn't a one-to-one exchange. Yeah. You read and review my book and I'll do yours, because you're not allowed to do that on Amazon. Right. So this kind of skews it a bit so that you have a group of people, but they aren't exchanging one for one. But still, it's interesting to read some of those reviews.
For me, I would say never on the first draft do I think about the reader. I'm just like, I'm picturing this story in my head, and here's how it looks, and this, I'm trying to just get down basically as best I can how I think it looks in my mind. Then after I'm revising it, and especially, I talk to beta readers and hear what they think, and then I go back, and like you said, Audrey, at that point you're starting to think, okay, how did this strike readers? Did it strike them the way I thought it would? If not, what could I do that will get across what I want them to get out of it? So I would say I think about the reader only in the revision process, never when I'm writing it at first.
I don't know if I think about I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe if I was more of a plotter, then I might think about that. But because I know so little about the story as I'm writing, I'm so focused on trying to figure out what the story is beyond the big picture that I had, that's all I can think about while I'm trying to write.
So you're big, like you're totally not a plotter. I'm getting. And in fact, I think in one of our previous chats, you said if you know everything about the story, you get tired of it and don't even want to write it anymore.
Right.
So yeah, that to me is kind of scary. But anyway.
Well, there's this point at which I figure out what the rest of the story is going to be, and when I do that, it becomes kind of, well, then what's the point? I know what's going to happen. It's this weird thing. And I worry that, well, if I've just figured out what the rest of the story is, maybe this is the point at which the reader figures out what the rest of the story is too. and they're going to lose interest because now they know. I don't know. It's a weird part of writing.
It's kind of like the when you're going on a road trip and some people are just eager to get whatever the destination is, and other people, like for me, it's the trip itself usually that's the part I really look forward to, and actually arriving at the destination is sort of a letdown. So yeah, but then it all depends what kind of plot you're working with. Like if it's a whodunit, then you really need to see whodunit. Whereas I'd say with literary writing, though, it is more the trip itself that's interesting.
A frequent piece of feedback I get on my writing is especially on first drafts, is like people will say, "You were in a hurry to get to the end here, weren't you?" They'll know when I'm just rushing to get through something because I need to get to the climax of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe that's true of people who kind of enjoy the road trip part, but then they realize, well, I've got to finish this up somehow. So then you get these sort of really abrupt endings that kind of are disproportional somehow, or they invoke things that are kind of, unrealistically, suddenly some new character shows up and fixes everything, that kind of thing.
You've just described why I'm not much of a reader of mysteries. It's always suddenly something shows up in the last chapter or two that is brand new that explains everything.
Yeah, you're right. I just finished a nice little mystery, that I thought was pretty good, but you're right. There's always something like that, like some new piece of info comes up, or something found in a box somewhere that, and then there's always the villain who is threatening to kill the investigator or the person, the protagonist, and in the meantime they tell him everything. Like, this is how I did it. Now I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And sadly, you took too long to kill the person, and now he's going to kill you.
Yeah, or everyone. You're going to get arrested, and the protagonist is going to get saved. Yeah.
So, anything more on what you like about writing?
Well, it is a big thrill when you've finished and you've got, especially if it's the printed book. There's something about that printed book.
Yeah.
So it's worth going through all the agony of formatting your Word document, or I suppose paying someone to format it if you don't want to do it yourself. Format your document so that it'll print and actually turn into a book. And that way, of course, somebody will find it in 100 years and read it around the campfire. Yeah.
So the Directorate, the Friendship Immortals, and the Irreparable Past. Those are going to be in someone's backpack 200 years.
Yeah.
But you're right. No, and it's one of the challenges of writing is, for so long you're writing and no one's seeing it, not getting feedback or anything like that. But then once you put it out there in the universe and you start to get feedback, and even negative feedback on some level is still feedback. And it's nice to know someone read it and they think something about it.
Yeah, actually, the worst thing is no feedback at all.
Right. The positive reviews, of course, are much better than the negative reviews, but it's just nice to, once you finally put it out there, to see and hear that people are reading.